Hey everybody, my name is Emily Steffen and I have a super fun project for you today that requires nothing precise and it requires hopefully all of your relaxation when it comes to sewing. If you're anything like me, I am not a super precise quilter or sewer, and I love sitting down at my sewing machine and just hearing the rhythm of the machine and putting pieces together and looking and seeing my project come to life. So that is what this pattern is all about. There's only a few, okay, I said there was no precise cutting. There's like kind of sort of two parts that are kind of sort of precise, but you don't really have to make them super precise. It's all based on your preferences, how you love to sew, and what fabric you have that you want to use. Because also, if you're anything like me, you probably are at the phase where you're looking at your studio or your space and going, hi, I have a lot of fabric. I bought these items or these pieces and I don't know what they're for, and or I don't remember, or I've used them and I have scraps. And so this project is also a scrap buster. And you can use up the fabric that you just have lying around. No need to go to the store, even though the store is really fun. So the pattern is downloadable. I want to alert you to that. It is downloadable in the banner on your screen. And then I also want to alert you to the chat box as we're live today, because if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you just want to share how you're choosing to relax and craft this January, or any other comments that you want to add, just please type them in the comments and I'm going to pop over and kind of keep an eye on those as we're working today. And the pattern is a simple PDF and you can download that. That will have all the written instructions as well as kind of some like visuals if you want to do this later and you just want to watch now. It has some kind of tips and tricks and visuals. But I want to tell you this. This, it's a scrappy pot holder is kind of what I'm calling it, in like a little bit of a sunburst pattern. I made this obviously for the pattern, but I also made it in a smaller form as a coaster. So if you're like, I don't need a pot holder, I don't know what I would do with that. Or if you want to just make it smaller or larger, this is an easy kind of just follow along and guide that you can use to get this idea into any size you want. And also this is a tiny little plug. I know this intro is getting a little long, but it's a tiny little plug that if you have any little people in your life that you want to teach sewing and the basics to sewing, this is a super awesome way to introduce them to how to use your machine properly, how to kind of press seams, how to just kind of work with your machine, because it's nothing precise and perfect and it will come together really quickly right before your eyes, which I think when you're teaching little people how to sew, it's really cool to watch them see things instantly rather than have to follow a 2-hour tutorial or pattern or something. So plug for that. So if you have little people, this is a great pattern. In the pattern, I kind of lay out the cutting instructions right away. A typical pot holder is usually 7 to 8 inches in a square. We're gonna do a 7 by 7 because that's the batting that I have laying around. If you have just cotton batting, which is awesome, use 2 to 3 layers of cotton batting. If you have polyester, polyester is not gonna work. And polyester batting is generally really thick, it's really fluffy. It's usually a lot more white in color versus the cotton batting is like a more neutral color. This is the cotton batting that I have today. Or if you even have laying around, or if you want to run to the store, there's a Pellon brand of heat resistant batting. And I know there's probably a lot of other brands. The Pellon brand seems to be in big box stores or on Amazon or in any sort of store that you have a lot more readily available in smaller quantities or in larger quantities. You don't have to buy it by the bolt. And that is an awesome heat resistant. Any batting you use except for polyester will work for this. So don't feel like you have to run out and get something. I have pre-cut my batting in my 7 by 7 square, and you can tell it's nice and wrinkly because it was shoved on the corner in my bookshelf, and that is how it is because that's how all of this is going to be today. It's going to be great. We're going to iron as we go. And the first thing is, this is one of the most relaxing parts to me, is I'm going to move this out of the way, is to grab your array of fabrics and start thinking about how you want to arrange it. I'm a huge color person. If you've ever met me before in real life or if we've ever talked, I love color. So for me, when I'm starting a new project, the fun part and the relaxing part is picking things out. Knowing we have a 7 by 7 square, I will the reason I cut this first is because then I can get a visual as I'm picking out my fabrics, because sometimes my mathing doesn't math quite well visually. So you can start to kind of lay out how you would want your fabrics to go. You don't have to do this process. I did, because when I was making this before, I found that I had a small piece that I was like very excited about that I thought would work really well in my color pattern. It was not 7 inches long to be able to cover the length or the width of my pot holder. Devastating, I know. So just get a visual idea of what you are going to use for fabric, bust out those scraps, start arranging. Teal is one of my go-to colors. So there are, some of these are pretty big, but the idea here is just to kind of find the things that you love and play around with how the colors talk to each other. And whenever I'm teaching little people about the color wheel, because I help out at my kids' school all the time, I usually talk about how colors next to each other talk well or don't talk well to each other. And maybe you've heard me say this before, I don't know. But the cool thing is if you ever pull up a picture of the color wheel on your phone or your iPad or whatever next to you, always the rule of thumb is colors next to each other and colors across from each other talk really well together. Meaning, generally, not all the time, generally a color talks well with each other across the color wheel because it's complementary, and generally, again, not all the time, colors next to each other, or the fancy word is analogous colors, talk really well to each other. So I find myself always kind of meandering in a color palette. This is a little summery, I'm realizing, but it's the dead of winter. So, and then this could be my backing maybe. I like that there's a couple solids, there's a polka dot, this is another little guy. I don't think I want to use that, but okay. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors, and then my batting. So we're just gonna have at it. And the way that this is kind of not precise, if you look at my pattern, actually I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I have 7. So we have 6, I used 7 in that pattern, no big deal. You can use 5, 4, 2, however many you want. The way that we're going to kind of make this happen is I'm going to fold one of these battings in half, and you can either finger press or you can use a pin, and for this little part you're going to use a pin, or if you want to you can use a pen or a marker, up to you. And all that it will do is mark. You can kind of see where my finger press is there. The heat of your finger will give the line, is give a mark. On the pattern, I used a pen, just a ballpoint pen, but for this, I want to show you this first. And we are going to sew directly onto our batting. That's what makes this super easy. And you're going to imagine the start of every line coming from the tip of where you marked this. So you're going to go outward, 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 outward. Now, does this have to be perfect? Heck no. Because if you look at my pattern here, this isn't one exact little point. It ends up kind of being a chunk of about 1 inch long where they all come from, because to make that point perfect, that's not what I'm here to do to make it perfect. So how you start is you'll start with 2 fabrics first, and then after that you'll add 1 on. So the process is lay the fabric, sew it, press it, cut it. Lay the fabric, sew it, press it, cut it. So it's kind of easy, right? Easy. So I'm going to lay my fabric, and you start with 2 pieces at first. So lay my fabric, and I'm going to line up. This is my little selvage part. I don't want that, so I'm going to line up the edge of my selvage with my pin and just kind of lay it in the starburst sort of way. Anything, if you kind of use your fingers, you can see, okay, this is the edge of where my batting is, this is how much green I'm going to have. Do I want more? Maybe I want a little bit more. I'm going to move that over. And then next, I'm going to add my next green color, and right side to right side, line this up, and we are going to stitch. You can do a 1/4 inch seam, you can do an 1/8 of an inch seam, whatever kind of seam you want to, directly onto our batting, stitch this, and then we will fold it over and press it. So let me move this out of the way to get my machine in. I feel like I have lots of things happening here, but I want you to see. Okay, so I'm not even pinning this in place, because the greatest thing about batting is that it's kind of like one of those old felt boards, if you ever saw those, where you can, the scenery in the felt board. Okay, I'm just gonna do a 1/4 inch, because that is my go-to. Stop. I'm gonna move my machine out of the way. You can see that it's just right along this edge. Move my machine out of the way, and then all you do is, dun 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 dun, you see that we have our first seam. So all I did was flip it right side out, and then I'm gonna just do a really, really, really quick press. You don't even probably have to do this step. The reason I found this step was good is because some of my fabrics, because they're scraps, get pushed in a scrap bucket and they get pretty wrinkly. So for me just to do a really quick press to make sure that the seam is, kind of pushed open as much as possible, seemed to help when we were quilting it so that it wasn't super bunchy. Okay, really quick, nothing fancy, that's what we got. So I'm gonna move that out of the way. Again, we sewed, we pressed, I'm gonna cut it, and then I'm gonna sew the next one. So I'm just gonna grab my scissors, and if you wanna be really precise about this, you totally can. If you wanna be not precise about this, totally fine as well. If you're a little kiddo, obviously have an adult help you with scissors. I'm gonna trim off this excess first, leaving, a little bit. It doesn't have to be precise. I just don't want to have bulky fabric all over Tarnation, me having to wrestle with. Put these back in your scrap bin. And then the one that you just cut, this is where it's a little bit of a visualization. You are going to kind of visualize, how do I want my next line, or where would I want to lay my next fabric? And you can do this one of two ways. There's two ways to do it. It's 100% up to you. I'm gonna show you one way, I'm gonna do the other way. The first way is this. You can not cut your green. You can lay your next fabric. This is a solid, so it's a little bit less visual. Right sides together, so this would be my right side. I'm putting my right sides together, and kind of imagine where your next line is going to be, right? So you would, open it up like that, right? This is one option, option one, where you would just sew it and then you would cut everything in the end. I'm not gonna do that because I don't like wrestling a ton of fabric through my sewing machine. It's totally just a preference that I have. So what I'm gonna do is cut down here, and I'm just gonna do a really rough cut in my starburst pattern, so going up towards the point, just to get rid of this excess so that I can fold it. Does that make sense? So first option is you sew it first. If you're like, I don't know that I can make that straight cut with my scissors. To me, it's not super precise, so it feels kind of easy to do. And then I'll just follow the kind of repetition that we did before. Lay right sides together. It's quite sticky, so I don't need a pin. Keep in mind that you never want to sew over pins if possible, because it could break your needle. So I'm getting really close to this. I'm just going to remove my pin, which was just to delegate where the beginning of my starburst was. Bring my sewing machine in. Just doing a 1/4 of an inch seam, or about a 1/4 of an inch seam. It doesn't have to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Move my sewing machine out of the way, open this up, just like before. Kind of looks like, I don't know, some sort of math problem right now. Give it a quick press. And I'm erring on the side of moving my fabric over so that it's kind of pulled taut here. And then again, you don't have to cut it right now, you can cut it next step, but I want to cut it, rough cut the bottom. I know I have 2 colors left that I just have chosen, so I'm going to leave enough space on the underside down here to know that I have enough space to add 2 colors. Also, the greatest thing about this project is there's no mathing on exactly how wide or big your strips need to be, which I really love, because it really makes it, you could make like a circus starburst with 900 tiny little pinstripes if you really, really want to. That feels like that would be kind of hard, but have at it. Another solid, so there isn't a very obvious right and wrong, but you get the idea. Right sides together, line it up. Here, let's go to this side right here. Line it up. One thing, I just want to point this out as I'm doing this because I just moved my fabric. I want to explain why I did that. This is a bigger piece of fabric that I'm using. It's been cut out right here. So rather than use the whole length of this one side, I'm going to maximize what's already been cut by using the small length, but also I have to make sure that my fabric goes off of both edges, because that's where I went wrong when I mentioned at the beginning that I needed to make sure and visually lay out what my fabrics were. When I first started this project, just to kind of play around with it in my studio, I started sewing and I thought, oh, surely this fabric is big enough, but it didn't go off the top and the bottom. So when I flipped it over, there was a gap. I don't know if this is making any sense. There was a gap of batting underneath, because when I flipped it, the sides, because it's an angle, the sides were growing kind of at the outside edge. Just make sure your fabric goes off the top and bottom, I guess, is the moral of the story. Also, you can tell I did not cut straight because this edge is straight, but my cutting is not straight. So I'm just gonna line the pink up as best as possible, and I'll end up cutting off some of the mustard color, which is fine by me. So lay your fabric, sew your seam. Ta-da! Open it up. Oops, there's the back. You can see my lines on the back. Open it up. Get rid of your threads here. Hello. Give it a quick press. It's kind of relaxing, I think. Maybe it doesn't feel like it is, but this is one of those projects that because there isn't a lot going on, it's easy to throw a movie on or put an audiobook in your ear or something, which I love. All right, rough cut. And let's go, this last one is just gonna be kind of small, but we're gonna go like this. Whoop. This does feel a little summery, which is great because we're in the dead of winter and it's chilly. Okay, last one. Lay on, line up your edges. This one, it's a little bit more obvious that you have right sides together. Right sides, I have my pinky polka dots. Right sides together. Lay it on as best as possible, line it up. Get it nice and stuck together. If you want a pin, you can. I don't like to. Bring your sewing machine over. This is the fun part. This is why this is fun for little people too to do. Ta-da! There we go. So I'm gonna, in this case, I'm gonna flip it over since this is our last one and just do a rough cut around the edge. Bring this in and just do a really quick last kind of press. There we go. So our front side is sewn, and before we quilt this or keep all the pieces together, we need to cut our backing, because right now all we have are in my case, the 4 lines of putting the potholder together, or the coaster if you're making a coaster, or this could become a wall hanging, I'm not sure, or pillow form. There's endless opportunities for this. That was my brain going. So before we do that, we need to cut the batting, because our next step is to kind of quilt in the ditch, or I like to quilt just on the edge of the ditch, which ditch is kind of the seam that we had just sewn. And if you want to kind of brainstorm, if you want to use fancy stitches, by all means do that. If you want to embroider something fancy on it, this is your time. But before we do that, I need to cut my backing. And I'm going to match my backing to what I want my binding to be. You do not have to do this. And honestly, if you don't have a big enough piece that is a backing and your binding together, then don't worry about that. So 7 by 7 is what we cut our pot holder to. Well, thank you. Looks like we're having some trouble with the comments. So I'm now just seeing your comments come in. I'll cut this quick and then I promise I'll look. So 7 by 7 here. This is the precise part, right? To make sure that you have it. 2, 4, 6. Wait, 2, 4, 6, 7. 6, 7. I try to only cut what I need to out of certain fabrics because I do a lot of scrappy things. So if I can leave that a full chunk, I will. And this is my 7 inches. Ta-da! Okay, so now I'm gonna check in. Oh, I'm now seeing all of your comments. So sorry. I'm seeing, holy moly, there's a lot of people from Minnesota and Texas. It's way warmer in Texas than it is here in Minnesota. So maybe our very summery palette is resonating with you. If you have any questions, please jump in because I would love to help answer, or maybe even some tips and tricks if you've done something like this before. So this is gonna become my backing right here. Teal backing, love that color. I also cut out a strip of 2.5 inch fabric from the same color as my backing. So if you want to cut that out at the exact same time, you absolutely can. Mine was shorter, so to make it longer, I'll touch on this in a second, but in the case of cutting, since you already have your rotary out and you're cutting, you'll want a 2.5 inch strip for your binding. Not for this step, but just so you have it. Now the next part, again, you can pin in place if you really want to. I really find that interfacing or batting is really like tactile, so I never seem to need to pin it. If you want to, you can, but all I'm gonna do is lay my backing fabric on top of my interfacing, and it probably looks like it's really big, but it is the same size. This is just excess fabric. And then I'm gonna flip this over, and I'm just gonna choose to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 easy just stitches, straight stitches to kind of quilt all 3 of these layers together, my front, my interfacing or my batting, and then my backing. So I'll pull this over. Whoops, there we go. If you're anything like me, your sewing table often gets full of about 1 million things, so maybe we're the same in that way. Okay. I have like a mustard color thread in. I love quilting with opposite colored threads or contrasting colored threads because I love to see the machine detail. Some people like to match. I just don't prefer that. One thing to note is my pattern does note this, and I'm just remembering I didn't do it again. I tend to always forget to change out my feet. If you have a walking foot for your machine, and maybe for a quilter you know this might be a good time to put it on. If you don't know what a walking foot is, a walking foot kind of is like a normal foot, but it's kind of separated in the middle, so it does like more of this walking rather than just like going through. It kind of picks up so that if you ever have anything bulky, it relieves the pressure on that bulk. This project, you totally could do that. You could throw your walking foot on. I didn't when I was testing this out, and I didn't right now because I just forgot about it. And it doesn't get bunchy or crumbly. Sometimes if you're sewing with really thick batting, like the polyester, the fluffy batting, and you're trying to quilt a couple layers together, you can tell because it gets bunchy, and the fabric, especially the top of your quilt, starts pulling in a weird direction. Just an option. If this is a project you want to try using your walking foot on, this would be a great idea. But don't stress if you are like, I don't even know what that is, nor do I even have one or have heard of it. Do not stress 1 minute. This is my last stitch, or seam rather. Okay. So I'm just feeling for where my interfacing is and making sure that my quilting goes off the interfacing. You'll be able to see it when I turn it over. So when I flip this over, you'll see, should have moved these out of the way. I just got so excited to sew. I'm just gonna trim these. You'll see that the four seams are just really simple seams that just go right off of the backing here. And there we go. This guy's stuck there. So now we can trim it up. This is kind of the same steps as what you would do if you are making a quilt. I mean, within reason, and maybe quilters would chime in and say it's a lot more complicated than that. Kind of, it is kind of. But the steps are, you make the front. You'd usually not sew it directly to the batting, but you get the idea. I'm getting a couple comments. I love what you're, thank you. Rosara says, I love what you're doing. I feel extra special knowing that every part of the potholder has a story that comes from another project. I had never even thought of that. That is a super cool way to think of this, that every piece of fabric is maybe a scrap from something else. That's a good table conversation. When you put this down after you make your tater tot hot dish or whatever you make, in Minnesota and Wisconsin, we make tater tot hot dish, and you put it on the table, you can say, oh, that's from the quilt we made for so-and-so, or that's from the dress I made for cousin Sally. I love that idea. That's super cool. Okay, so I'm gonna square this up, shore this up, whatever you wanna call it. Basically, just cut off your excess, in other words. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. I know in a lot of quilt blocks, you wanna make sure everything is exact. I would bet heavens to Betsy right now that this isn't exactly a 7x7 square. It's probably a teeny bit off, and that is okay with me because it's just a potholder or a trivet or whatever you want to use it for. Okay, cutting off my extra and tossing it. This is always satisfying though because you kind of see it really come to life. Ta-da! Okay, there we go. Look at this. I think it looks really good. You can kind of see it come to life. Okay, so next is our binding. I cut, oh my stars, I thought I was being really great by ironing this ahead of time. 2.5 inch strip. Some people love 2.5 inches for binding. Some people love 3 inches. Some people love 1.5 inches. Some people love really small binding. Some people buy the store-bought binding. Whatever you have on hand, please use it. I wanted to use a color that I did not have enough length of because our binding is the thing that is going to go around all of the outside, and this is my fancy way of measuring to make sure that I have all of it, enough of it, but I didn't have enough in one fabric, in one piece, so I simply cut 2 pieces that were 2.5 inches, sewed them together, pressed the seam open, and then I was able to fold this in half. So let me tell you this, there's so many different ways to do binding, and some people have preferred methods and some people don't. There's 2 different methods I want to show you in the pattern for binding. I give kind of the visuals here. There's a hand-stitched binding, which I love to hand-stitch. Some people think it is not the greatest in the land. And if you do the hand-stitched binding, I'm just gonna show you visually here so that you get an idea of it. Hand-stitched binding, you're gonna start from the front side and you will line up your raw edges, the edge that opens up here, this open raw edge, to your raw edge. And you're gonna stitch in place. So when you stitch it in place, look at that's nice, and then you hand stitch it to the back and it's beautiful and it's all finished. Because the reason why we have our folded, or the reason why we ironed this in half, is to have one side that is not needing to be finished. It's not a raw edge. So hand stitching is a traditional, I would say traditional, maybe a quilter would correct me in that, a traditional way to bind a quilt. Lining it up, you'd sew it in place. Once it's sewn, you're able to flip this around and you get that beautiful edge. That's the pictures here. The second way to do it is this second paragraph, which I'm gonna show you here. If you're machine stitching or binding, which is the faster way, in my opinion, but not as like fun, you'll start on the back side here. And the reason you start on the back side is because you wanna end or show your finished seam to look, I want to say this right. You want to show your finished seam to look as finished as possible. So the reason you start on the back, and this is what I'm going to show you to do, you're going to again line up your raw edge with the raw edge or the outside edge of your potholder. We'll stitch it in place. Then we'll kind of iron it as best as possible towards the front. And then to get it to stay, we're gonna do one more seam. It would be like a top stitch, which is really close to the edge on the front. The reason why you start on the back and finish on the front is so that you have control over what that top stitch or that end seam looks like, as opposed to starting on the front and then stitching this to the back. Then this would become the bottom of what you're stitching, and that is just a lot harder to control. So hand stitching starts on the front, machine stitching starts on the back. That's how I've been taught. Maybe you have something different and you want to pipe in the comments of something that's a little easier. The other thing I want to tell you is this. Binding can seem like the most overwhelming thing in the world, because what you're essentially doing is, you're laying this down and you're finishing it. And the reason why people get really overwhelmed is this little moment right here. How do I put my two ends together? This is how I do it. And if you do it a different way, please pipe in, because perhaps there's an easier way to do it. I like to start in the middle of one of my, I'm machine stitching, so I'm gonna do it on the back. The middle of one of my sides, something that probably isn't super obvious, so maybe I don't want to start on the sunburst side, maybe I want to start over here. And I also like to start by not stitching the edge of my binding. So meaning that I'm going to start like this. I'm using my claw clip so you can see. I'm gonna move this out of the way because we don't need that anymore. And I typically don't always clip this in place, but I feel like for this demonstration, I do want to show you. The reason I don't start with the end is because I want to leave myself room or space to be able to join my ends together. So this will make sense to you. So I'm going to clip this in place. Clip this in place. When I get to the corners on my machine, I'm going to explain this to you or show this to you. Kind of fold it over. Clip this in place. It doesn't have to be perfect right now, but at least it gets it around to the edge so I can show you the visual. These claw clippy deals are one of the best things in the world, I think. I'm sure quilters have had them forever, but I haven't. But I love them. I think they're awesome. Okay, so, hang on. Okay, so my edge, my raw edge on all four sides is outward, right? My raw edges are together. When I get to here, I have my two endies, and I could just sew them like me, but then you're gonna eventually still have a raw edge that's on your binding. So to avoid that, what we're gonna do, I'm gonna explain it, and then I'll show you on my machine. When I get to this point, I'm gonna do my best to figure out where I can make a seam to stitch them together so that it lays completely flat when I flip it. I hope that made sense how I explained it. So I want to have enough like tails to be able to work and go, okay, yep, this is going to work like this. I'm going to make what I would call a vertical or horizontal stitch like this, so that this whole binding becomes just one piece, like a snake that never ends, and then I can flip it. I hope that makes sense. Okay, I'm gonna show it to you on my machine. So, not starting on my edge, I'm gonna add my binding. I'm gonna back stitch just to make sure it's nice and stitched in place. When you get to your corner, and also this is a potholder, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just gonna say that. When you get to your corner, you are gonna eyeball how far away you're getting to the edge of your potholder as the same distance as your seam allowance. So for instance, if you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you want to stop your needle down at a 1/4 inch from the edge of your potholder, the potholder the batting is the word I'm looking for. So I'm gonna go, whoop, hang on, this is on like crazy fast. It's probably like there. I'm gonna do one more. One more. There we go, okay. I'm gonna leave my needle down, lift up my foot, pivot this, and you kind of like, I'm sure maybe some people would say, oh, that's how I fold the corner of my sheets on my bed. I don't ever fold or make my bed, so I know it's like you're like folding it over on here so that it becomes a nice square edge, and you're keeping the raw edge flush to the raw edge on the edge of your pot holder. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments, because I hope I'm explaining this properly. So again, straight, straight, straight. And about when I get to about 1/4 of an inch from the edge, I'm going to stop with my needle down. So I kind of feel with my fingers. It is the most unexact thing. Okay, about there. Lift up my foot, keep my needle down. I'm going to take this off. And you kind of just like move the fabric out of the way. I don't really know how else to describe it. It kind of makes like a triangle, kind of. Like the fabric. See how it makes like a triangle or a 90-degree angle? I'm sure there's some like math thing to this, like the Pythagorean theorem or something that I don't know. Okay, I'm feeling with the edge. I'm gonna go about the same distance away, like about there. Lift this up. I feel like I need to go one more. Hang on. One more. One little stitch. Probably wouldn't have made the difference. I'm gonna undo these because my guessing was not right. There we go. Move that out of the way. Oh, let me say this. I didn't say this. If you are the kind of person, and this would be a good pot holder to do this with, to hang your pot holders, in this step, if you want to make a little loopy or use a loopy with a ribbon or something, you would want to include that in this part of the binding so that it's all kind of tucked into where the binding is. Of course, you could always hot glue it or hand stitch it on later. But if you're a pot holder hanger, if you have I feel like IKEA has those really cool strips with the little dangly S hooks. This is the part where you would do that. We just smash our pot holders in a cabinet drawer. So as much as this would be lovely to hang up in my kitchen, this is where you'd want to put a little hanger on it. Okay, come close to the edge, needle down, lift the foot, and look at, this is where our tail is. So I'm gonna leave a space, a chunk of a space, like, I don't know, inch or 2 inches, 3 inches, inch and a half, something like that. And I'm going to stop sewing and cut my threads. So leave a space because I want to be able to put my tails together so that I do not have a raw edge. So let's just say right about here, and I'm going to anchor my stitch or back stitch a little bit. If you want to anchor it, you can do that too, either one. The anchor button on your sewing machine on a Janome is just a little circle, and all that does is go up and down like 5 or 6 times in the same spot. Okay, so here's what I mean by that, right? We have these 2 tails. If I were just to sew like this, I would eventually have to cut this and I would have a raw edge showing that would fray and it would eventually take our pot holder apart. So here's how this works. I like to use a pin for this. You can use a marker, you could use a fabric marker, you could use a pencil, you could use your eyeballs and just eyeball it. It's totally up to you. I like to use a pin. So what I do is I'm gonna kind of go halfway between here, this distance right here, and go, all right, to make this flush, like to make my binding flush or flat, I need to sew it, hang on, right here. I'm gonna put a pin. So do you see that? Do you see how right here is where my binding meets each other? Does that make sense? Right there is where my binding meets each other. Actually, we're gonna move that because it's really close to there. So hang on. Right here, I could have left it, but I'm being a little picky. But this is why it's kind of not exact. Right here is where I need to sew to make that flush. Does that make sense? Please pipe up if it doesn't. Say something in the comments. Oh my word, Joan. This is a brilliant idea. Off topic, but Joan says, can I use old towels as batting for extra heat protection? 100%, as long as they're not polyester, because polyester is gonna melt under the heat. But yes, I feel like towels are usually 100% cotton, maybe a little bit of nylon. You can test it by trying to iron it, like with an iron to make sure it doesn't melt, but that's a great idea. Because if you're using scraps, you might as well use old towels. I love that. That is, Joan, that is a great idea. Okay, so this really crooked pin that I didn't mean to put in crooked is now gonna become the seam for what I'm stitching to make sure that my binding goes all the way around. I like to drop my needle first, then take out my pin, because I do not want to stitch over a pin, because every single time I try, it always breaks my needles. Maybe it doesn't for you, but it certainly does for me. And I'm just sewing a vertical or horizontal, however you want to. See seam, see, I just like sewed my sides together. See that? It's like now together. And this should now be flat, right? So I can trim off my excess because I don't need all of this, because that's just extra. And now, look at, this is now completely flat. So when I tuck it over, I do not have a raw seam. So I need to finish this edge because there's a hole here. Remember, we didn't finish this. So I will open them up because I like to open them up. Maybe you want to press it. I don't press it because it feels like it gets pressed when you stitch it. I'm going to bring my sewing machine back over and finish this seam. Make sure, hang on, make sure that gets tucked under there, which wasn't going to happen. If you need to use a pin, tuck it under. So yes, you will have your two raw seams, right, from where we cut this, but they're going to be inside your binding, because look at, now what I'm going to do is fold this over to the, oops, hang on, there's threads everywhere. Fold this over to the front. So my raw seams are now tucked inside of where my binding is going to be. So if you want to, you could press this open, and you can see that my corners are kind of nice and 90-degree angle, and it gives you like a 3D pot holder. But now what we're going to do, this is where I always use my clips. Also, I feel like this is another moment where there's a lot of differing opinions on how you finish your corners. Do what you feel like you love, do what you feel like looks good. I don't think there's a right or wrong, but maybe somebody could tell me that there is a right or wrong. I'm gonna use my claw clips, and what we're gonna do is fold this over so it stays in place evenly around the edges. I like to just give my edges when I machine bind an easy, hang on. You know what I'm gonna do in this case? I didn't have to do this before. Trim off the little corner of bulk right there. You don't have to do that. I didn't actually do it before, but look at, I like to do like a really quick sort of, I didn't show you that, like a little fold. Some people do not like that fold, and they would rather do like more of a curvy kind of edge. That I feel like that's just totally up to you. I don't feel like there's a right or wrong, but again, maybe somebody else can say that there is. Okay, I'm just trimming off this excess. I didn't do this before because the batting that I used was a lot thinner, but this is thicker batting, so this is going to be a really good pot holder. Okay, again, use what you have. Maybe the I mean, we all have so much extra, I feel like sometimes, because we accumulate, because it's so fun to go to the craft store. I always put a clip right where that edge is, and sometimes two, because I want to make sure that it stays. And look at it, it's totally coming together. Clip, clip, clip. Okay, and then clip. So, right, because we're machine stitching, we stitch it on the back, and now I'm gonna keep my pot holder to the front, and I'm just gonna top stitch a nice stitch on the edge. I guess depending on how far away you want it, you could zigzag if you really wanted to. Just right here on the edge, and it will look really finished on the back. And nobody's probably gonna turn your pot holder over. I don't know, maybe look at the back. I like to start at my seam, or where my ending was of my binding, just because I feel like it makes it kind of just one spot that looks like it's a start and stop, as opposed to multiple spots over your pot holder. You do not have to do that. In this case, almost every other time in my life, I will do a forward backward stitch to anchor it, to anchor my stitch, like a backwards back stitching. In this case, I anchor it with my anchor button because I don't want extra bulk. So for me, that looks like this on this machine. Is I'll put my needle down, and then I press my anchor button and I'm just pushing my foot feet and it goes up and down in the same spot a handful of times. It'll stop when it's ready, and then I just slowly stitch to the edge, leave my needle down, pivot. If you feel like you want to go up the sides of where that corner is by your corner, you totally can. Some people will tell you to do that. I feel like you don't have to, but again, that's personal preference. Go to the corner. Whoa! My thing folded in because I took out my claw clip too soon. Oop, one more. Ta-da. Needle down, foot up. Whoops. Hello. Oh, my thread just came undone. I maybe poked it with my needle. Hang on. I just need to rethread my machine. It's not a sewing project unless something goes wrong on your machine, right? Or at least for me anyway. Okay. I think I must have poked it. Trim this off. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna oh, I need to thread it, hello. I'm gonna re-anchor my stitch just because this is a pot holder that I know is gonna be used and thrown around and likely thrown in the washing machine, so I want my edging to be really on there so it doesn't come undone. But because I'm anchoring it and not back stitching, I was over here, right? Where was I? Right here. You won't see a ton of bulk. So anchor, push the little, I think they're all circles. I am unsure on different brands. But maybe somebody who knows more of a Bernina or a Singer or a Pfaff or something can say something. All right, get to my edge, leave my needle down. My binding is not perfect, so if you're looking really closely, there's like this one tiny part right over here that's a little bit bulky, but this is why this is a fun project before you get into the world of quilting or needing to bind something really kind of professionally. But it's still, it looks great. It's just a little tiny, there's one little pinch back there. Okay, I'm coming to the beginning, which means I'm gonna really watch making sure I get that tail in there, and then I'll anchor my stitch again, which pushes my button. We're almost done. Okay, ta-da! So clip any of your threads right here. And I have 2 sets, obviously, because I had to rethread my machine. But clip any of your threads, toss your threads away, make sure everything is the way you love it. I love having contrasting thread on, because look at the back. You can see it, and I really love that. This actually also proves why we start on the back with machine stitching, because I'm about pretty consistently all the way around, about 1/4 of an inch off from the very edge of where my binding is here, but on the front you can't tell. And it doesn't necessarily matter, quote unquote, but if you had that as your front, it would look like it's wrong, even though it's not. So this is I hope this is a super kind of easy, relaxing, fun way to make a purposeful project for a gift or for your friends or for yourself, for your home. By just using up your scraps and having fun and sitting down at your sewing machine and soothing. So I super appreciate you joining me as I kind of gave these tips and tricks. And remember, if you want the exact pattern, please download that in the banner with the link. And I hope you have an awesome, relaxing way to sew with some super beautiful pot holders in the end, or coasters, whatever you choose to make. Thanks for joining me today.